my pleasure to introduce our host and moderator for the First Friday season. Driven by a mission to redefine where science and storytelling belongs and a belief in the power of science to connect people and communities, please give a warm hand to neuroscientist and science communicator, Dr. Yewande Pearse.
Introduction, Marisol, as always, and welcome everyone to First Fridays for our third discussion of the season. Time is flying. So I'm very excited actually about this discussion, experiencing sound. It really is going to invite us to explore what it means to engage with sound beyond just hearing. And together we'll look at how music, theatre, and technology are opening new ways of experiencing sound for the deaf and hard of hearing communities, and what that teaches us about communication, connection, and creativity. We'll reflect on how accessibility can move from accommodation to innovation, and how the arts can create spaces where all audiences share in the power and the beauty of sound. So I'm thrilled to introduce our guest this evening. Please welcome DJ Kurs. DJ has been a driving force in redefining the possibilities of theatre since becoming artistic director of Deaf West Theatre in 2012. Under his visionary leadership, Deaf West has produced a series of groundbreaking and award-winning productions, including the critically acclaimed opera with the Los Angeles Philharmonic, Fidelio, and the revival of Spring Awakening, which he guided from an intimate 99-seat Los Angeles production to Broadway, and beyond Broadway, where it captivated audiences and garnered multiple Tony nominations. Beyond his work on stage, DJ is a passionate advocate and influential voice within the deaf community, and it's our pleasure to welcome DJ to the discussion. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Okay, so I want to start with a bit about you, DJ. This season, of course, is all about exploring the many ways in which we experience sound and music and how those experiences shape our lives. So I wanted to start by just asking you really how you personally experience sound and your relationship to the medium.
Well, I'm pretty old, I guess. Because when I grew up, sound was mysterious to me. Coming from a deaf family, my parents are deaf. I did have a sister who had a slight hearing loss, okay? And she had a record player, and she would play these LPs. And I wondered, how does this disc make sound? Why do people who can hear react to this? And slowly, little by little, over the years, I started to understand what sound was. And then MTV came, and I understood music and its relationship to artists. And from then on, music had a tremendous impact in my life. The visual medium of MTV brought me into the world of sound. So these days, however, deaf kids are born into a world of accessible sound. They're constantly exposed to music from the day they're born, whether it be through MTV, YouTube, not to mention all of the powerful headphones, assistive listening devices, and different instruments that expose deaf and hard of hearing kids to sound. For me personally, sound is also a way I can see that people connect to the world through sound. You know, for example, if I go into a club and I see everybody around someone in the floor, I want to jump into the middle of that circle and get my dance on. I want to experience what their experience, what they're doing. Maybe my experience won't be exactly theirs, but I know when I see people out on a wood floor and there's bass thumping, I better get on that floor if I want to feel the bass, right? And that's one way, one window into my relationship to sound and my journey into the world of sound, which is your world.
And that I love that you make that point about the bass. It's such a universal experience to be able to collectively enjoy sound and music. And with my neuroscience background, one of the things I find fascinating is this idea of mirror neurons. So just being able to respond to others experiencing sound is so powerful, and being in those immersive environments. So thank you for sharing a little bit about your experience of sound, but also I'm curious about kind of life before Deaf West Theatre. You've been with Deaf West since 2012. So I'm wondering what drew you to Deaf West specifically, but theatre as a medium. You're obviously passionate about music and those experiences you just described.
Well, I'm born and raised in Southern California. So after college, I moved back to LA because I wanted to work in the film industry. And the film industry, I tried to get a deaf movie made, and it was tough, extremely challenging to move forward on these projects. And during my journey there, I looked over to Deaf West Theater, who has been founded since 1991. I'm not a founder. Ed Waterstreet is the original artistic director, original founder. And I saw Big River at the Mark Taper Forum when I was young. And I thought, wow, all these people coming to see a musical in sign language. And then that was an additional step on my journey into music, where I entered the world of music that was accessible through sign language. I'd never seen that before. And not only that, the hearing world was coming out and watching this musical through the lens of sign language. And I was smitten. After that, I talked to Ed, and Ed told me, quite frankly, said, look, theater has less decision makers. At Deaf West Theater, I'm the boss, and I say what goes. And I thought, well, that's interesting. And I slowly left the more collaborative film world and entered the theater world, and I never looked back. And I have to say, my journey at Deaf West is still one of learning, of discovery, of daily experiences, building on the future, and also honoring the past generations of deaf artists. And we're also here to honor them in the same space with hearing actors in this modern context. And it can be a challenge I accept. And we've done many musical performances, and I've gone to many musical performances. I've gone to a lot of concerts, especially lately, because technology is there these days. We have visual effects, we have the captions with the lyrics, and we've got more bass. And, the music, the world of music is more accessible to deaf people. I do remember going to one of the first musicals at Deaf West. It was Oliver, before Big River. And I saw deaf people protesting in front of the theater saying, look, not my theater. We don't accept this musical. It was Deaf West's first foray into music, and a lot of people didn't care for it. They said it was too dependent on the hearing world for success. And, these days, the deaf community loves their musicals. So to me, that's a beautiful part of our journey.
And it sounds like that, obviously, with all things as an evolution, and things change. And I think one of the things you've spoken about quite passionately is that Deaf West Theatre isn't just for deaf community or hard of hearing communities. It does intentionally invite hearing people into the deaf world. So I'm curious as to what other sort of ways in which Deaf West is evolving, and there's obviously still so much to be achieved, and you're breaking a lot of new ground, showing that things can be done in the arts. So we'd love to hear, sort of in terms of visioning, where you see this evolution.
We're doing several projects that are coming up that are uncharted territory, to be honest. Next year we have a show by a comedian who became deaf later in life, and each audience member is going to have a set of headphones, and that audience member is going to auditorily follow that artist's journey through the headphones and the diminished sound or advanced sound in some scenes. And to me, it's going to include the diverse nature of the deaf community. Listen, the deaf community is not monolithic. American Sign Language is our native language. However, not all deaf people have access to that language. So we have to respect them and bring them into the fabric of our community, and also those who love and listen to music. We're bringing out one of the top sound designers in theater to work with us on this adaptation of this film called The Sound of Metal, which was a hit movie about a drummer who loses his hearing, right? If you remember that. And the theatrical version, we've been talking about various ways to define the experience of hearing loss. And the sound designer, I'll just give you a glimpse of what we've talked about. We're going to have a drum set on stage, but the sound will be delayed by 3 seconds.
Interesting.
And that delay is going to take the audience away from the immediacy of sound. And that's the concept. And it's really exciting to me because the deaf audience will feel that break from sound for that delayed moment that the artist is experiencing. And we didn't have license to do that in the past, I think, because we were still finding our voice as a community and our artistic voice. And it's now expanding to include music. We just finished American Idiot. It was a mind-blowing experience. So many deaf actors now can sing. No, I'm not joking. They've learned how to sing on key. They took voice lessons to help their character development. And to me, that was both mind-blowing and highly inspirational. That's just one more tool in their kit as actors. And that expands their ability to audition for roles that show this new deaf approach to the future of sound and what it means to us as people. On the other end of that, we have a fantastic community of hearing collaborators in the theater world who are passionate about understanding the deaf world even better than they ever have before because they're in the trenches with us and we're discovering these beats together and where our journeys intersect and where that can take us in the form of art and theater or various other art forms in the future. So we're blessed in that way.
Lots of exciting things coming up, and much of which we're going to delve into a little bit more deeply as we continue the discussion. But there are just a few things that I wanted to highlight that you mentioned. I think sort of the approach to these productions, you talked about Sound of Metal being something that you're working on. With your background in film, I know that you have expressed an interest in actually the data around authentic storytelling and diverse representation within film, which can be, of course, more widely applied. And I think one of the striking things to me is successive films on screen, like Coda and Sound of Metal, have clearly demonstrated that authentic, complex, deaf storytelling can have not just an artistic impact, but also huge commercial appeal and wide appeal to broad audiences. So I'd love to hear a little bit about how you think theatre and Deaf West specifically challenge these limiting narratives. You said it's not just one stereotypical deaf identity. So I'd love to chat through a bit, what true diversity means when it comes to the deaf experience and what true representation looks like to you.
Well, yes, great question. I think we might have to go back to the origins of deaf theater in general. Deaf theater is very young, maybe 50 years old, starting with the National Theater of the Deaf. And most of those actors were from schools from the deaf, residential schools, where they lived with other deaf kids and grew up with this beautiful form of sign language. Most of the deaf kids in residential schools back then happened to be white. And so that was the blueprint for a successful deaf theater program. White, generationally deaf people. And that's become the Deaf West of today, where we have many different prisms into the deaf community that we've explored, and we've learned to frame the world around us through the deaf community as opposed to the other way around. And we're not the only deaf experience, right? Every deaf person has their own unique deaf life. They could be deaf and black, deaf and blind, deaf plus, which in our community means deaf plus multiple other disabilities. They could be from a residential school for the deaf or from public schools with other kids who could hear. They could be from deaf families or families that don't use sign language. We've learned that codas are a part of the fabric of our community. Children of deaf adults and the experiences they bring as natives to a community they're not a part of. And so you can see the extended deaf community becomes the extended deaf West family. And people who have interest in the deaf community have become part of our fabric. Teachers of deaf people, interpreters, students, ASL users. We've brought them all in, and we understand and recognize the unique range that all of these individuals bring to the deaf community. Deaf West essentially is a place where all of those experiences can come together, collaborate, create art, and bring that to the broader world. That's very unique, and we're very proud of that. And art is the best way, I believe, to communicate our culture and what it stands for to the rest of the world. And I think I've understood that from an early age, and that's why I'm still passionate about creating more art, more experiences. I mean, for example, things are more connected than we realized before. Okay, the director of CODA, Sean Hayter, came out to a Deaf West show, sat in the audience, and then 3 or 4 shows later, she introduced herself, and we introduced her to some deaf actors, and she cast Troy Kotzer, who ended up winning the Best Actor Academy Award. So that ripple effect is something that we're very proud of creating, and we hope to create more ripples that become waves. We hope to spotlight more voices that haven't been seen or heard before, and that's why we're here.
And I love that as an example, because I was going to ask about impact. Like, what is the impact of having this true diversity within theatre, and how does that change the landscape? But that's such a great example, because I think there are 2 things to think about, really. So the 2 examples I gave, Coda and Sound of Metal, is really centered on the storytelling around losing the ability to hear a music, which tends to be a narrative we've heard, but then it's more nuanced, and there's so much other, things happening in the story. But in terms of normalizing the deaf community in storytelling, what does that sort of look like? Moving away from stories which are just focused on music and sound, like, what would you like to see more of in that kind of shift?
Well, the ultimate goal essentially is to make enough art to the point that people just think it's normal that deaf actors are in movies telling stories, that they are writers, that they are directors, that they are out there creating art and telling stories. I mean, when I started with Deaf West 12 years ago, I thought things would move a lot faster. Okay, I was idealistic, but the system is the system, and we are born into a world that doesn't understand us, and an industry here in Hollywood that doesn't even rate our existence, and it makes it even harder for them to open the door to deaf actors. I get it. And like you said, we hope to normalize our work to where Hollywood opens their doors, because we will normalize their work.
Yeah, thank you. That's it. I mean, it does take time, patience, I'm sure, and a lot of fight to kind of change things. But I think a lot of the work that you've mentioned is doing that. So, I mean, this now leads me to thinking more about reimagining accessibility and normalizing deafness in the arts. And there are some great examples that you mentioned just as we were kind of getting started with the discussion, including Spring Awakening, which is, it's a bilingual and scalable production. It started in a small theatre and then ended up in Broadway. What bigger opportunity is that than Broadway? So it clearly can be done. But I'd love to hear about how sort of the collaborative process behind Spring Awakening kind of resonated so deeply with both deaf and hearing audiences, and how it was able to do that so successfully.
Well, first of all, Spring Awakening was not a brand new musical that we created. We brought an existing musical and did something a little different to it. We just looked at the time frame, 1920s Germany, and worked with the show's original director, Michael Arden, and well, the director of our show. And we talked about the 1920s. What was happening then? Okay, sign language was banned from classroom use and the home. So deaf kids would leave their homes not able to communicate with anybody, really not having communicated with their parents growing up. And so we use that as the foundation of our adaptation. We had a half cast, half deaf, half hearing, which is the Deaf West model and approach. But what we did here was to show both worlds are living together, and we had great hearing actors who knew nothing on the first day about deaf culture or sign language or any of it. And they willingly jumped into our system and our vision and learned their lines in sign language and had to learn how to sing their lines while signing. And those hearing actors, many of them, it was their first time on stage, right? And the deaf actors as well. And asking them to dance and plan their sign language around the beats of the music was very difficult. And it exposed all of us. We were all vulnerable at the same level, to the point where they could find their connections underneath all of that. And that's essentially how we make all of our productions accessible to both audience members. But this was a unique way of staging it and acting it. And one thing I love about our unique process is that it does begin with at the point of intent. So at the beginning of our process, do we have all the answers? No, we don't. We make our discoveries in the rehearsal process. And while we're working, we think, oh, maybe in this moment we have to have it subtitled. Oh, in this moment we need to have someone cue the deaf actor when the song starts. And that's what we find as we're going through the rehearsal process and we're building out the story. At the same time, we're learning the lines and tweaking all of that until opening night. I mean, even at dress rehearsal, we're still bringing in members of the deaf community and asking them, can you understand every line? Can you follow the action? And in the end, we hope to have the audience a mix of two different peoples watching one show. And that can only happen through an organic process where the vulnerability is felt and worked through in the rehearsal process. And that's our goal, and that's what we hope to achieve.
Thank you for sharing like a bit of behind the scenes insight into what that process looks like. And I think it's just really says a lot about the art and skill of communicating in general and finding different ways to express art. And it provides such an incredible platform to do that. And also just the vulnerability that you mentioned, the openness that you would have to enter into the space, because of course, I'm sure there's fear for different reasons around that, and being able to openly approach and problem solve together is such an integral part of that process. I'm not sure if everyone knows the sort of background of Spring Awakening. You said it wasn't a new production. Did anything specifically draw you to that, or was that something that kind of an opportunity that presented itself to you?
Well, one of the actors who was in Big River approached me with this idea and said, listen, I want to direct this concept, this version of Spring Awakening. So what's your version? He said, well, with sign language. And I said, yeah, well, you know, in 1920, sign language wasn't allowed in the classroom. And then he said, yeah, well, how about we do it? And then we got to talking. And so one of our homegrown actors, well, he was a lovely actor before he came to Deaf West, but he learned about us and then brought us back in. So this is the idea of building out this web of connections in our community, and he brought back something that we gave him. It came full circle.
And I mean, I didn't know that sign language was banned back in the 20s. That's really shocking. So thanks for sharing that, because yeah, in terms of progress, things move slowly, but that is kind of mind-blowing to me. So we talked about Spring Awakening, a couple of other classic productions actually that I guess Deaf West has helped reimagine in terms of not just accessibility and accommodation, but actually being integral to the creative process itself, is Fidelio and Oedipus. And both show how accessibility can transcend just the accommodation part and actually become the core and a creative strength. How did that actually kind of creatively in the process pan out? So integrating ASL into these classical works? How do you feel like it actually was able to elevate the storytelling? And what does it mean when you actually make that a central part of the creative process? Because there's so much room for imagination there.
Well, again, great question. I'll start with Oedipus. So we do pick our projects very carefully, and the idea behind Oedipus was that he would become blind, of course, as the story says. We thought, what would a deaf blind hero look like? And also in that story, we have a blind person, Tiresias, I believe, who can forecast the future. So we went ahead and cast our first ever deaf blind actor for our stage and included this language called pro-tactile on the stage. This is our first experience using tactile work, and it was an amazing experience. And since that production, more and more deaf blind actors have been cast in various productions around the country. I'm very excited, and we can't wait to spotlight their stories and their journeys as well. Also, we worked with this opera called Fidelio. Basically, people sometimes approach us with the idea for an opera and have over the years. And for me, I thought, that's the worst possible art form. It's completely inaccessible and would never work for deaf people. Well, Gustavo Dudamel, the conductor of the LA Phil, came to me and said, listen, you don't understand what we're thinking. I know you're going to say no to us, but look, we want to do Beethoven's only opera, and you all know about Beethoven. He became deaf, right? And so I told Gustavo, okay, yeah, he became deaf, but it's still an opera. It's still inaccessible. And he said, no. You don't understand. I grew up in Venezuela in a small town, and there was a program there called El Cima, okay, where all the kids had to learn classical instruments, and that's how Gustavo got into the world of classical music. He said also the deaf children in that village, well, they become that White Gloves Choir. They're known as the White Gloves Choir. And I grew up with deaf kids, and I know how to work with them. They sign along to all of our music. And I said, really? Let's see how this works. And well, so I had to enter the world, Gustavo's world of bilingual opera, and that's the result was Fidelio, and it was a huge hit, and we were allowed to tour Europe with that show last summer. Again, opera and sign language, who knew? But when I sat and experienced that opera for the first time, my mind was blown. It was a completely unique and brand new art form. I sat there on the wood floor and I felt the bass. At the same time, I watched the orchestra, and I could see the synchronicity of the violin's bows. I could see the synchronicity of the pianist's hands, and all working with that beautiful sign language coming from the actors, which was telling the story, and it brought me back to the 19th century. I mean, this opera is set in that era, and I felt like I was there. I guess I didn't hear the opera, but I sure felt it, and I understood the intention, and I believe the audiences did too, and it looks like we're going to explore the opera art form again and see what future projects bring to this new and creative way of finding points of entry for deaf people into the world of sound. And for audiences who can hear, I mean, what more of a special, unique layer than deaf actors on stage telling the story? They haven't seen that for 1,000 years, so again, that takes us back to having a safe place where we don't know what's going to happen when we walk to the edge of the cliff. Maybe we're all going to fall off the edge, and that's okay. And that's where Deaf West has come from, and that's where we're going to keep going, to the edge of the cliff, and we're going to keep jumping.
I think it's just such a wonderful example. I love that it's opera, and I love that your mind was completely changed, and the fact that it just made it so much more of an enriching experience, and for everyone, it was a huge success. Really breaks new ground, and again with this collaborative approach, I wanted to kind of dig in a little bit more to what that means. So collaboration doesn't necessarily mean deaf communities or leaders within the deaf communities educating and guiding necessarily. Could you kind of talk a little bit more about what true collaboration means? And then on the converse of that, one argument could be made that, why that a hearing leader or community within that space is kind of needed in order to make these things happen. So wanted to kind of unpack that nuance a bit.
Well, I love that question. The process is what I live for, quite frankly. It's, there's so many examples I can give you, but listen, the first day of rehearsal, right? We have two different languages in the room, two different cultures, so to speak. All the deaf actors sitting on one side talking, all the hearing actors on the other side talking. Sometimes the hearing and the deaf creative team don't know each other that well yet. They're circling each other, trying to figure out where they can push, where they can pull, and it's awkward. It's a tense day. And maybe the interpreter missed a line, or maybe an actor doesn't know where. It's very, very vulnerable. But as time moves on, and we're communicating by looking into each other's eyes, communicating with our hearts. We deaf people, to get attention, we have to tap you on the shoulder. By the end of the rehearsal, everybody's tapping each other on the shoulder. Hey, look at me, look at this. And we're all learning from each other and connecting with body language. 80% of sign language is based on your body and your face, right? So you have hearing actors who tend to talk like this become more like this and able to use their bodies to communicate more. They're not perfect. They're not signing the way that you're trained at the university, but we're all communicating and we're working past those moments of friction. And sometimes we have to check in with each other, see if we're okay before we can move forward. There's a lot of hugs in the early days of the rehearsal process. And that's what it takes to bring everyone together and to surpass that vulnerability to get to the emotionality that translates to the stage.
That's beautiful as well. I imagine it's super awkward to begin with. And I think communication, as you say, is 80%, so many other things. And so it really is just a universal learning experience. And I'm sure each time it's a different scenario, different learning. And with Deaf West, collaborating in these different spaces, new things come to the surface. LA Phil, we've talked about LA Phil, Getty, Villa, Broadway. These are really big platforms. So what is the significance of the fact that this is happening on these big platforms? Would you say, I know you said things are moving slowly, but would the optimist in you maybe say that institutions are beginning to move in general away from accommodating access to actually seeing it as a genuine artistic opportunity that warrants funding and continued exploration?
Well, it makes me happy when spaces like this, the Natural History Museum, opens its doors to deaf people. How incredible is that? To me, that's a huge opening step, and to me, a very lovely sign of how forward our world has become, that spaces like this that aren't typically accessible to deaf people are open on a Friday night and welcoming and providing interpreting services and making all of this lovely information available. Is tonight going perfectly? I have no idea, but this is a first step. A first step, I think it's pretty good.
Yeah, I hope so. Fingers crossed. What we got feedback afterwards. I wanted to talk about another great example of how sort of this idea of just universally increasing accessibility in the arts has been so successful, which is American Idiot. Would love for you to sort of share with the audience that project, and then I think we actually have a clip of it, which we can play afterwards.
Let's show the clip.
Yeah, let's do the clip first, and we can talk about it a little.
Don't wanna be an American idiot. Don't want a nation under the new media. Hey, can you hear the sound of hysteria? This
I'm so sad I didn't get to see it. I'm a huge Green Day fan, and it just, I mean, you can feel it through the videos. So wanted to talk about kind of technology in theatre and innovations and assistive tools, and just kind of why this project specifically was so meaningful to you.
Well, the concept behind this production was that it was like a concert that's 100% accessible. We just wanted deaf people to be able to experience a concert. I mean, this musical is songs back to back to back. There's very little dialogue. So we thought, okay, what would happen if a concert was completely accessible? We thought, well, first of all, most of it, not all of it, but most of it would be signed. Would it be subtitled? Captions? Would there be a stage where everyone could see each other? Different levels of performance, mixed cast. Once again, half hearing, half deaf. So we have counterparts, right? One actor sings the lines, one signs the lines, and they're the same person. So we double cast every role, and an enjoyable part of the production was we had a huge amount of Green Day fans who flew in from all over the United States. That was amazing. Many of them came up to me after the show and said, "That's the first time I understood the lyrics."
Oh my goodness, so true.
With the subtitles and them acting out the story, I always thought it said something else. Yeah, that was wild. And also the way that the sign language becomes a physical extension of the lyrics. It's almost like they're acting out the story. The choreography and the music and the lyrics and the sign language, I mean, 2 + 2 + 2, it becomes infinite, the result. And from that experience, we had so much fun. It became the best-selling musical in the history of the Mark Taper Forum, and we're very proud of that.
And I mean, that's incredible, and I believe it. So you talked about, we're going to go to Q&A soon, but you talked about all of these different sort of ways in which you could make it accessible, but also enjoyable, and also just elevating the experience. And like, I love the little tidbit about understanding the lyrics for the first time. Is there anything sort of in terms of future innovations that you're excited about, or that you think will actually help to speed up the process that you've been sort of trying to move along for since you've been with Deaf West?
For me, the biggest change that I've seen in my time at Deaf West is the generational divide or difference between the deaf community that has nothing to do with or doesn't understand music to a deaf generation that accesses music on their iPhone. We have older folks who perhaps don't understand that the kids have caught up with the culture and are interested in what's inside the language. And this Generation Z, I guess they're called these days, truly do look at Deaf West as something that is not part of the fringe, or it's odd, or it's out there, but it's one of the players in the artistic world, and they're used to it. They're born into it. And I'm very excited to see this generation that is born into and raised up in a generation where accessibility and overlap of cultures and languages is a common everyday theatrical experience. And that gives me a tremendous amount of hope. And I certainly can't wait until that generation ages into some new and crazy concepts, and we'll see what they come up with.
Me too. I share that sentiment of excitement, because it does feel like it's becoming more built in. It's not an afterthought. It's something that you're leading with, like a consciousness. So I definitely share the same feeling. We are almost at time. I wanted to leave a little bit of room for Q&A. So if you did have a question that you had for DJ, 2 options. If you have a question, if you raise your hand, one of the Natural History Museum staff will come up with a microphone. Or if you wanted to sign your question, you could come down to the front of the stage. But just raise your hand first so we know the order of questions.
Hello. I'm curious, within the deaf community, how do you speak about what you experience in music? What kind of words do you use? How do you, amongst yourselves, talk about music?
Thank you for that question.
Well, if you ask 10 different deaf people how they experience music and talk about it, you will get 10 different answers. I can only speak to my personal experience, and I do know that we have plenty of deaf people in the room who may wear hearing aids, may have cochlear implants, may choose not to wear assistive listening devices, but still get down on the dance floor at raves. I think that there is no one set hard and fast rule of how we talk about music, but I think that we do sort of avoid certain cliche words like vibrations. I think vibrations probably are the least important element of experiencing music for us. I think for me, it's more important about experiencing the moment and seeing what's happening visually, what's happening through the character of the person expressing the music, how they are, the lyrics, and how they mirror the structure of the song in terms of beats. Right? Thank you.
Thank you. I'm a huge Deaf West fan. I've seen many of your productions, and I had the opportunity to see Spring Awakening at the original production in the small, intimate space, and then again on Broadway. And it was interesting how the feeling for me of the musical changed in the different spaces. I'm curious how doing theater productions, how much you think about the space that you're in and how that is interpreted for when you're directing or you're producing a musical, if that is part of the discussion when you're moving different spaces and taking the same show also into a new audience.
Great question.
Wow, I love that question. Thank you for asking that. We really do try to design spaces that are so-called deaf-friendly as a foundation. But let me tell you what happened with Spring Awakening in particular. We found the theater, we booked it, we hosted auditions for the various characters and the roles, and we found some fabulous actors. One of them, Alyssa Stroker, she used a wheelchair to get around, and her audition was lovely. She hit a home run in the audition room. In the back of my mind, I thought, oh no, the theater we've booked, we've already put the money down, they have stairs, what are we gonna do? Mm-hmm. So what we did the very next day, we went and found another theater, the one that you saw us at, the Inner City Arts Theater, and we booked that one. So listen, that's just my way of saying there's nothing is guaranteed. Nothing is guaranteed until we get there and we have our actors and we start working. And I just have to be open-minded and flexible at the beginning because who knows what's going to happen. Allison stayed with us and made it to Broadway, where she debuted on Broadway. That theater wasn't accessible. It didn't have a bathroom and a dressing room on the first floor. So we paid to renovate that building to make sure that Allison could get to and from. And later, I think in the first week or two of the run, we found out that, oh, interesting. She became the first actor in a wheelchair ever to perform on Broadway in a production there. And we thought crazy. That happened, people thought that happened because we planned for that, but it didn't. It happened because we just were open to what is possible. We didn't say, well, listen, sorry, we love you, but we can't have you. Can't is not in our vocabulary. And Allie is a lovely actress. She has continued her career. She went on to win a Tony Award. And that's part of the ripple effect I was talking about earlier. That was a ripple that Deaf West made that, I don't know, I hope that answers your question.
That's a great answer. That's also shocking that she was the first. Just at the top there.
Thank you. I'm curious to know if there are, what's next for Deaf West Theater? Are there specific areas of sound exploration or accessibility that you're really keen on, excited about, or looking to lean into?
All of the above. Yeah, well, for example, next year we are going to do an original musical about a deaf inventor who invented some glasses that translates spoken language to American Sign Language and American Sign Language into spoken language. So it's a romantic comedy, and I'm excited about that because it reflects the deaf experience in the form of musicals and includes technology. It's something we haven't done yet, and may move our game forward. If you have any exciting new ideas, I'd love to hear your pitches. Bring them, please.
Thank you for the question.
We have a question here.
Sure. I wanted to congratulate you first. I kind of see you guys as innovators, and I feel like the barriers of communication between the hearing and the non-hearing have kind of dropped, and it's something like American Idiot kind of feels this amalgamation of like communication where things that become visual and non-visual are kind of become one. What is your vision of the future, via technology or via, all these new things that are kind of you know, machine learning and all these things? Do you see a future where there's no barrier between the hearing and the non-hearing, and where things are, I don't know, that we don't even can imagine?
Wow. Deaf people love and always have loved technology. We're always the early adopters of online activity. These goggles, these VR goggles, are very fascinating to us. I tested them out. AI with sign language recognition is a brand new field that will be explored. But I think going back to our trust in technology, that's where blind faith, perhaps, I've learned over the years, not the best way to approach technology. We need to maintain our humanity in the face of technological advance. If we get to the point where we're not in the same room anymore, that's a wonderful thing for deaf people, but we don't want to remove the human experience of communicating in person, to make conversation happen in the moment, to find that spark. It's inside all of us, and that's what I trust. And that's what I think will drive our art for the next years to come in that regard. So thank you. Who knows?
We have one more question over here.
One more question.
Yeah, hi. I've had a lot of exposure through the disability community, mostly on the mobility side of the community. And I find that a lot of people, like me, consider their own situations unique. Like nobody else is really like me. It's not quite the same. If you're in a wheelchair and I'm in a wheelchair, we have different experiences. I was wondering, I just want to say a comment, this art form that you're propagating, I think really draws together some commonality, and people can share their experiences and find a commonality that they don't, that they didn't know existed before. Does that strike you when you bring these type of audiences together?
Really great observation.
100%. I hate it when people just check the box. Oh, disability, check.
Mm-hmm.
What is the definition of disabilities? It's endless. The human experience is endless. And that's not who we are. We're not here to check boxes for each individual that may be out there and everybody's individual experience. With that attitude, we'd have to embrace all individuals, and that's the point. The industry should embrace people for what they wrote, their vision, their idea of a story. And that's something that we hope we can get better at doing, in creating opportunities for those out there who typically don't have opportunities to tell their story. And, that just makes me excited about the future as well. The fact that we're increasing the tools in our kit, our ability to reflect. I used to be very proud of writing scripts and my English writing abilities, and now it doesn't matter. you could just say a few ideas into your chat GPT prompt and
Yes.
off you go, right? So, I mean, maybe that's something I'm excited about too, technology-wise. The ability to empower people whose voices were marginalized at one point.
Unfortunately, we're out of time for any more questions, but DJ, thank you so much for joining us on this Friday evening and sharing your experiences and your insights from Deaf West and beyond. This has been such a wonderful discussion, and also to the audience for your thoughtful questions.